And welcome members of Nature Vancouver. So the title of my talk this evening is the state of the world's birds and what you can do to help. It's been quite a few years since I last had the pleasure of speaking to Nature Vancouver, so I thought I would just do a quick overview of VARC for those of you who don't know who we are or what we do before talking about the state of the world's birds and what you can do to help birds and the environment. As you obviously know, I'm preaching to the converted here, so we're also right in the middle of spring migration. So I'll also talk about the miracle of migration as all of our migratory birds return to us from the neotropics where they've overwintered. And there's a photo gallery of some of the birds that we've banded at our research station in Tlahutlam, as Michelle said, formerly Colony Farm Regional Park, at the end of the presentation for you to enjoy as well. So just a little background on VARC before we start. VARC is a registered Canadian charity, which my wife Carol and I founded back in 2009. And our mandate has two key components: to provide data and research support to safeguard habitat for breeding and migratory birds, and to provide public outreach and education to raise awareness of environmental issues as they relate to birds. The research component itself is split into two parts: our bird monitoring and banding station in Colony Farm Regional Park, where we conduct our bird research and surveys, and our external partner programs with many groups, groups like Van Dusen Botanical Gardens and other groups where we engage in citizen science projects. For example, our Merit Bluebird Nest Box monitoring program in the interior of BC, where we monitor more than 400 bluebird boxes with a team of local volunteers there. And we have two exciting new external partner projects this year with our raptor monitoring and banding project out in the valley, and a thermal imaging project to detect nocturnal roosting birds using set-aside fields in Delta with the Delta Farmland and Wildlife Trust. So lots and lots going on at VARC. The second component of our mandate is public outreach and education. And this really is a very significant part of the work we do to raise awareness of the environmental threats facing our birds. And we do that through presentations, through workshops, courses, public events, and visitor programs. We've also developed an in-classroom schools presentation and a program with lesson plans for teachers to deliver to their children in 8 units. We also host VARC open houses at the banding station, SPCA Kids Summer Camps, and media interviews with people like Thor Dykau here when he visited the banding station with Breakfast TV to talk about bird research and conservation. At the foundation of all of this is the status of the world's birds, which is deteriorating with more and more species at risk of extinction. And the number of bird species listed as critically endangered has reached an all-time high. The number increases, unfortunately, every year, and we now have 1,445 species. That's 1 in 8 of the world's bird species threatened with extinction. Add the near threatened species, and the list goes up by another 1,010. That's almost a quarter of all bird species on the planet. And some of these globally threatened species have not been sighted for many years and are likely already extinct, like this Eskimo curlew, which hasn't been seen for more than 60 years now. Another species that went from millions to a few museum specimens in just a single lifetime. And the problem, of course, is global. Over the last decade, BirdLife partners have worked to assess the conditions and trends of the world's birds. And what we know about the changing state of the world's birds is that many bird species, including common ones, are declining. Farmland birds in Europe have shown marked declines over the past 3 decades. Almost 60% of common bird species in Europe have declined across 20 European countries. Birds like these two here, corn bunting and turtle dove, which were very abundant and familiar to me growing up in Hertfordshire to the north of London, as you can see, have suffered precipitous declines. Water birds are showing widespread declines, particularly in areas such as the Yellow Sea region in Asia. And this has had especially devastating effects on long-distance migrant shorebirds that rely on intertidal mudflats to refuel for their journeys. Studies of resident Australian waders reveal that 81% of their populations have disappeared in 25 years. And more than 50% of all waterbird populations are declining. And it's all largely due to widespread loss of wetland habitats. Shorebirds are one of my favorite groups to study, and I've been lucky enough to see most of the world's shorebirds, including this one, of course, spoon-billed sandpiper, which is critically endangered with fewer than 100 pairs remaining. In an ever more crowded world, species that need lots of space, such as this bird, Great Indian Bustard, another species uplisted to critically endangered, are losing out. The population of India is expected to reach 1.8 billion by 2050, and the population of the planet is expected to reach 10 billion. And of course, birds that need lots of space are quickly losing out. Long-distance migrants are declining, and when you see the threats to long-distance migrants, and not only on their winter grounds, but on their breeding grounds and at stopover sites along the way, it's really not surprising. This photo is of a common cuckoo, a long-distance migrant between Europe and Africa, and really a much-loved spring visit to England, where I grew up. Everyone knew when cuckoos had arrived in spring, because you'd hear them everywhere. But not so common anymore, unfortunately. Since the early 1980s, cuckoo numbers have dropped by almost 70%. And we tend to think of these problems as other countries' problems and not ours here in North America. But as I'm sure you guys know, we've lost almost 3 billion birds since 1970. And that's a net population change in overall numbers of birds. It means nearly 30% of birds have been lost, or put another way, that the North American bird population is down by almost 3 billion breeding adults. The State of Canada's birds report also shows more species declining than increasing, and dramatic declines in groups like our aerial insectivores, our grassland birds, and shorebirds here in Canada. Populations of our aerial insectivores like barn swallow have fallen by more than 80%, bank swallow by 98%, cliff swallow, northern rough-winged swallow, and purple martin all by more than 60%. More than 13,000 IBAs, important bird areas, have been identified around the world, but many are in an unfavourable state, and nearly half lack any form of legal protection whatsoever. So why are birds declining so precipitously? A range of threats are driving these declines. The greatest expansion of agricultural land in recent years has taken place in the tropics, with things like palm oil plantations in Malaysia and vast industrial-scale monocultures, which has caused large-scale declines of farmland and forest birds. Each year, longline, gillnet and trawl fisheries are responsible for the incidental deaths of hundreds of thousands of seabirds. BirdLife's Albatross Task Force has been working with the trawl fleets to reduce this bycatch, and they have succeeded in reducing the scale of the problem, but each year hundreds of thousands of our seabirds are still killed. Seabirds are in fact threatened at a faster rate globally than all other groups. 19 of the 22 species of albatross are threatened with extinction, including this bird, the critically endangered Chatham albatross. The introduced house mouse has had a devastating impact on seabird populations on remote islands in the Southern Atlantic and Pacific. Places like Hawaii and New Zealand are now almost devoid of native land birds. Contamination of food sources, like the widespread use of diclofenac, used as an anti-inflammatory drug in treating livestock in Asia, has had a devastating effect on vultures. 30 years ago, tens of millions of these birds, white-rumped vultures, were flying the skies of Asia. It was probably the most abundant large bird of prey in the world. It's now on the brink of extinction. White-rumped vulture populations have declined by 99.9% since the early 1990s. And that's had an impact on humans too, with increases in diseases like tuberculosis, anthrax, and foot and mouth diseases. And despite alternative safe drugs being readily available, diclofenac has been authorized for use in domestic animals in Spain, where 80% of all European vultures are found, and is now becoming widely available on the EU market. And then there's unregulated hunting. Egypt is the worst place to be a migratory bird. 140 million birds are trapped during full migration. Hundreds of kilometers of nets, traps, snares, and these horrible lime-coated sticks are set out to harvest wild birds. And that's in addition to the 25 million hunted in the rest of the Mediterranean each year. We just saw that European turtle dove populations have declined by 95%. More than 1 million of them are illegally killed each year in the Mediterranean as well. And no species can survive that level of persecution year after year, in addition to all of the other threats that they face. Climate change, of course, poses a very serious threat to nearly half of all the bird species in Canada. Some species only survive within a tiny climate bubble. Mercury pollution has risen nearly 50-fold in this species, in ivory gulls in the Arctic, over the past century. Further really clear evidence of the global and circumpolar impacts of human activity on Arctic wildlife, which is already stressed by the most pronounced climate change on Earth. So as you can see, a range of threats are driving these declines, but they're all pretty much anthropogenic. And the World Wildlife really summed it up when they said, in what year will the human population grow too large for the Earth to sustain? And the answer is about 1970. In 1970, the planet's 3.5 billion people were sustainable, but the population is now 8 billion, and wild plants and animals are running out of places to live. In the past 50 years, the abundance of global wildlife has collapsed almost 70%. Too many people, too much consumption, and growth mania. We've taken over 70% of the planet's land and 70% of the planet's fresh water. And these photographs, really from the Guardian newspaper in England, really sum up what has happened to the planet in the past several decades. Sprawling Mexico City, the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, a feedlot in Brazil, a shopping mall in southern India as consumer culture spreads globally, greenhouses as far as the eye can see in Almeria, Spain, BC, the Brazil of the North, with clear-cut logging on Vancouver Island. We just do a better job of hiding it up here. And catching the trash tube in a remote bay in Indonesia. We were on a birding trip to Indonesia last year, and we were absolutely shocked at the extent of environmental devastation with virtually all of the lowland forest gone, and also the amount of plastic in the ocean there. No room for nature in China. By the end of this decade, China will have built enough new skyscrapers to fill 10 cities the size of New York City. And China consumed more cement in the 3.5 years from 2010 to 2013 than the US used in the entire 20th century. Cattle grazing as more forest is cleared in the Amazonas of Brazil. Brazil's Amazon rainforest has suffered the worst fires, as I'm sure you know, in a decade. Oil wells in California. And researchers have discovered seabirds are eating plastic waste because it smells like their food. And it's now thought that up to 90% of all seabirds eat plastic. This fills their stomachs and they then starve to death. As you can see here, cigarette lighters, toothbrushes, and other trash have been found in the stomachs of dead albatrosses like this one. Every year, 17 billion pounds of plastic enters the marine environment, and that's more than 32,000 pounds of plastic every minute. Some dwelling residents in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Haiti's falling apart, and there's no safety net for the people there. Former old-growth forest leveled for reservoir development just south of us down in Oregon. Agriculture expansion in intensification as we convert more and more forest to agriculture. So it's a bleak picture, and we're all seeing firsthand the effect of all this environmental devastation in forest fires, floods, and droughts all around the world. But let me cheer you up a bit, at least, hopefully, by talking about our birds and the miracle of migration. As I said, we're in the middle of spring migration, as I'm sure you already know, when our migratory birds like this gorgeous male lazuli bunting, which breed at Colony Farm, undertake their long migratory journeys from the neotropics back to their breeding grounds here. And as you'll see, migration really is a miracle, with birds making astounding journeys from breeding grounds to winter grounds and then back to breeding grounds each year. So let's just talk a little bit about migration. As I'm sure you guys know, there are both resident and migratory birds. Resident birds do obviously not make seasonal migrations. Within the migratory bird populations, there are both short and long distance migrants. And within the species, not all populations may be migratory, which is called partial migration. And a good example of partial migration is American robins. Partial migration simply means that within a species, not all populations may be migratory. There are both migratory and resident individuals. And people often notice this in early spring. A few robins hang around all winter, but suddenly in spring, there's an influx of robins, and you'll see them in flocks, sometimes of hundreds, on lawns and school playing fields. And these are often the migratory birds returning. The answer to why do birds migrate is really simple, and the answer is survival. The risks of staying behind simply outweigh those of moving on. There are four main migratory flyways in North America: the Atlantic, Pacific, Mississippi, Central, and the Pacific Flyway, where, of course, we are here in Vancouver. Flyways follow mountain ranges and coastlines and tend to avoid large stretches of open water, barriers such as big lakes and bodies of open water. Routes are genetically programmed or learnt from adult birds, and routes on forward and return migration are often different, as we'll see. Many birds migrate in flocks. Bird migration is all about saving energy. And one study showed that birds migrating in flocks actually choreograph the flapping of their wings with exquisite precision to help them save energy, which is pretty amazing in itself if you think about it. The altitude that birds fly on migration varies, but most birds fly within the 500 to 2,000 feet range. An exception to that altitude is this bird, the bar-headed goose, which migrates over the Himalayas to spend the winter in parts of South Asia. And these birds have actually been observed flying at 24,000 feet. They have, as you can see, they've got broad wings, and the hemoglobin in their blood has very high oxygen affinity. But just imagine the energy and demands and the physical effort it takes to climb to 24,000 feet, just short of the death zone. And maybe an even more amazing bird is this bird, a new study that showed this tiny bird, the great reed warbler, which migrates 7,000 kilometers between Northern Europe and sub-Saharan Africa twice a year at heights up to 6,000 meters, nearly 20,000 feet, higher than Everest Base Camp. And this is a bird that weighs about the same as a house sparrow. Many of our songbirds migrate at night when the air is cooler and less turbulent, and when, of course, there are no diurnal predators present. And obviously, this happens each spring and fall as migration continues. So, I always tell people at this time of year to just take a moment to go outside this evening and just consider the absolute miracle that is happening right above your head. So many of our songbirds make non-stop nocturnal flights of some 700 kilometers or more. But look at the longest non-stop migration of any bird, a bird called the bar-tailed godwit. And it makes the 11,000 kilometer journey from Alaska to New Zealand in 8 days without stopping. And these birds actually sleep by shutting down half their brain. It's called uni-hemispheric slow wave sleep. But it's equivalent to a human running at more than 70 kilometers an hour for more than a week. And just think of the challenges of doing this. Distance, timekeeping, navigation, weather, flying at high altitudes, communication, all of the physiological challenges. I always say that mammals are not the biggest evolutionary success. Birds are better in everything. And birds burn their fat loads up to 10 times efficiently as humans do. And it's really the fat they store in advance, which also keeps them hydrated. So a marathon runner can grab a cup of water from the sidelines. Birds don't have that luxury. So when they burn fat, they make carbon dioxide and water. It's called metabolic water. So their fat stores are acting as their canteen. So a marathon runner is really an inadequate metaphor for them. They can't hit the wall like a marathon runner can, or they'll die. They don't eat or drink for over a week. It really is more like a superpower. And speaking of marathon runners and superpowers, when in 2019, an Ethiopian athlete set a new record by running a marathon in less than 2 hours, it was described as superhuman. The semi-palmated sandpiper that flew from subarctic Canada to the Orinoco River Delta in Venezuela managed the equivalent of running 126 consecutive marathons, and at a metabolic rate several times greater than an elite human runner can achieve. And again, this is a bird 6 inches long and weighing 25 grams, less than a fox sparrow. The fastest migrant is another endangered species called the great snipe. It flies the 6,800 kilometers in 3.5 days from Sweden to Central Africa, at a ground speed of over 90 kilometers an hour. And just a bit of trivia, the word sniper actually originated in the 1700s amongst soldiers in British India. If a hunter was skilled enough to bring down an elusive snipe, he was called a sniper. And even our smallest birds, like rufous hummingbirds, are super long-distance migrants, breeding as far north as Alaska and overwintering in Mexico. They make the longest migration of any hummingbird, and they take different routes depending on if they're migrating south or north, which is called elliptical migration. So as it heads south in the fall, it moves through the Rocky Mountains, taking advantage of late blooming flowers at middle to higher elevations. In the spring, it avoids the mountains and follows the Pacific coast northward, where many plants are in peak bloom. So they go from Alaska to Mexico, nearly 6,500 kilometers. They can fly more than 2,000 kilometers without stopping. And actually, based on body length alone, that's the longest long-distance migration of any bird species. Even the Arctic tern, which is a circumpolar breeder, for rufous hummingbirds, it's actually 78 million body lengths, which is crazy. They weigh just 3 grams with wings beating at 80 to 130 beats a second and hearts beating at over 1,200 beats per minute in flight. Simply amazing. The longest migration of any songbird is a bird called the northern wheatear, a bird from Baffin Island in northeastern Canada, crossed the Atlantic to winter in western sub-Saharan Africa. But 2 wheatears banded north of Fairbanks, Alaska. These birds flew over the Bering Sea and through northern Russia and Kazakhstan before crossing the Arabian Desert to winter in areas of Sudan, Uganda, and Kenya. So the Alaskan bird's average round trip, 30,000 kilometers, is the longest known migration of any songbird. And again, this is a bird the size of a sparrow in your garden. So geolocators were attached to these birds in Alaska and then collected when the birds returned to their breeding grounds the following spring, allowing us to pinpoint wintering areas and stopover sites along the way for them. So how do they do it? How do they do it? How do birds return to precisely the same site they occupied previously? We do know that birds use polarized light. They use the constellations, the Earth's magnetic fields, and visual landmarks. But we don't know why blackpoll warblers, for example, choose a different return route back to their winter grounds in South America and choose to fly non-stop over the Atlantic Ocean day and night for 4 days or more, 4,000 kilometers over water. Again, a small land bird that weighs just 13 grams. So let's just talk about things that we can do to help birds and the environment. And I honestly think that people want to help, but sometimes it's completely overwhelming to think that we can stop habitat loss and degradation on a global scale or climate change. But there really are a number of simple things that we can do right now to help birds and the environment. And really the first thing is to make windows safe and prevent bird strikes, which has been a major campaign at VARC. Window collisions are a significant threat to migratory birds. In Canada, according to the Government of Canada, window collisions kill up to 42 million birds every year. In the US, collisions kill up to 988 million birds. That's over 1 billion, 1,000 million birds, which die from window strikes in North America each year. And it's one of the top sources of human-caused bird mortality, despite being easily preventable. Because of the sheer number of windows in our structures, the toll on birds is enormous. You may have seen that last fall in Chicago, following late night and early morning strikes to the heavily windowed McCormick Place Convention Centre, 1,000 migrating birds were found dead at this one building in one day, in just one day. But residential windows are even a greater threat because of the sheer number of them. And as I say, this has been a focused campaign for VARC to get people to take action by making windows safe in their homes.
Between 16 and 42 million birds die annually as a result of window strikes in Canada, and up to 1 billion birds each year in North America. We can change this. Bird strikes are easily preventable. Visit the VARC Window Strike webpage and see how you can take immediate action to make your windows safe for birds.
So there's a simple DIY product from Feather Friendly in Ontario that people can apply themselves to problem windows. And you can buy it online or from Wild Birds Unlimited stores. Lots of information on window strikes on the VARC website under the conservation tab. So please check it out and take a look. Number 2, keep cats indoors. Outdoor cats are a year-round threat to birds and other small animals. Free-roaming domestic and feral cats are the number one human-related source of bird deaths in North America. A study by Smithsonian and the US Fish and Wildlife Service found that free-roaming house cats, that's feral cats and household pets that are allowed outside, all or part of the time, kill between 1.4 and 3.7 billion birds each year in the US. And cats are the number one human-related source of bird deaths in Canada. These non-native predators instinctively hunt and kill birds even when they're well fed. So today, more than 100 million feral and outdoor cats function as an invasive species in North America, with enormous impacts on birds and other wildlife. And really, this has to stop. We don't allow free-roaming dogs in our cities. Cats are not native animals. All of the research has been done by groups like the Stewardship Centre of BC. We have all of the evidence. Other cities like Calgary have banned free-roaming cats. So bylaws can be changed, and we're really working to get bylaws changed here in Vancouver.
Did you know that cats are the number one human-related source of bird deaths? Since the 1970s, bird populations have been rapidly declining. And cats kill around 3 billion every year in North America alone. But it's not just birds who are in danger. Outdoor cats face threats such as disease, cars, unwanted pregnancy, and cat theft. So how can you help? Supervise your outdoor cat. Or better still, build your feline friend a catio in your back garden. For more information, visit the VARC website and help make British Columbia a safer place for cats and birds.
And so again, not only do outdoor cats threaten native wildlife, they face dangers themselves while they're unsupervised outside, as the video says. So please, if you have cats or your neighbors have cats, please encourage them to visit our Cats and Birds webpage and either keep them indoors or consider building a catio enclosure for them. Again, lots of info on our website, and we offered a cash prize of $1,000 for the winner of our Create a Catio competition last year. So please help spread the word about cats and birds. Number 3, reduce lawn by planting native species. We host a bird-friendly gardening workshop and are encouraging homeowners to reduce lawn by planting native species of plants. We have an estimated, I think it's 40 to 50 million acres of lawn in North America. Birds have fewer places to safely rest during migration and to raise young. And research has shown that during spring migration, 50% of radio-tracked thrushes landed within 55 yards of houses and remain there all day. So even tiny pieces of nature are important for birds crossing these increasingly fragmented urban and suburban landscapes. So add native plants, provide shelter and nesting areas for birds if you have gardens. Our bird-friendly gardening workshops really encourage people to create not just bird-friendly, but wildlife-friendly gardens. There really is a huge potential to support wildlife by replacing lawns with native plants, by just nibbling away at lawns and planting native plants, and really especially with increasing water shortages and drier summers ahead. And when you're creating a bird-friendly garden, don't forget water. We're often asked, what's the best way to attract birds to your garden? Water is the #1 best way to attract birds to your garden. We have a number of water features in our garden in North Van, and this is a short video that shows how important water is to birds and how many species you can attract by simply offering copious amounts of clean, fresh water. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and that's the way to get birds into your garden, copious amounts of clean, fresh water. Number 4 of things we can do now is avoid pesticides. More than £1 billion of pesticides are applied in North America each year. The continent's most widely used insecticides are called neonics, and they're lethal to birds and to the insects that birds consume. They're not good for us either. So nearly 70% of produce sold contains some form of pesticides. So reduce pesticides around your home and garden. Look for healthy organic food choices and help cut out some of that £1 billion of pesticides used each year. And number 5, another one is to drink bird-friendly shade-grown coffee. 75% of the world's coffee farms grow their plants in the sun, destroying forests that birds need for food and shelter. Shade-grown coffee preserves a forest canopy that helps migratory birds survive the winter. So please buy shade-grown coffee, not just fair trade, but bird-friendly shade-grown coffee. More than 70 species of North American migratory songbirds overwinter in coffee plantations in the tropics, including orioles, warblers, and thrushes. So what happens is that native trees are often eliminated from farms to grow coffee, leaving little to no habitat for migratory birds or other tropical wildlife. We get our coffee from Birds and Beans in Ontario, which is just birdsandbeans.ca, so an easy URL to remember. But on the VARC website is a list of all the suppliers in Metro Van selling bird-friendly shade-grown coffee. Habitat loss on the winter grounds is a key driver of bird population declines, particularly of our songbirds, as more and more forest is converted to sun coffee plantations and other monoculture crops and pastures. And what's really interesting is the ideal conditions for coffee production actually overlap with the elevation belt holding the highest concentration of migratory birds. It's between 1,000 and 2,000 meters. You may have heard Swainson's thrushes in our surrounding forests in the summer. They're easily recognized by their beautiful spiraling flute-like song. Thrushes, tanagers, and warblers like this yellow warbler commonly winter in shade-grown coffee plantations where native habitat is no longer available for them. And number 6, protect our planet from plastics. There are just so many statistics about our plastic-obsessed culture. North Americans throw away 100 billion plastic grocery bags each year still. And plastic debris acts like a sponge for toxic chemicals, becoming a highly toxic poison to marine animals like this albatross, which ingest plastic, mistaking it for food, and then regurgitate it to feed chicks. And the rate of plastic pollution continues to steadily increase worldwide. Again, with one study last year estimating that about 8 million metric tons of plastic enters the ocean annually. And that's enough to cover every foot of coastline on the entire planet. So please reduce your plastics, avoid single-use plastics, and choose reusable items. It's not enough to just recycle because so much still ends up in landfill. So every little does help, and those are just half a dozen small things that we can do, all of us immediately, to help birds and the environment. And I'll just finish with this excerpt from Mayoko Chu's great book called Songbird Journeys. And she said, when migratory birds cross our paths, they compel us to stop and marvel at their beauty, their fluid lives in 4 seasons and distant places, and the ecological intricacies they require to survive. As the miracle of migration continues, the arrival of songbirds each spring is a cause for celebration, for summer would not be the same without them. In autumn, though, we cannot keep them. The songbirds grow restless and depart, leaving us with emptier winter days and a quiet reminder that we should not take them for granted. So I just couldn't leave you without some photographs of some of the amazing birds that we've banded at our Colony Farm station. But first, just also a couple of photos of some of our public outreach and education programs to raise awareness of some of the environmental threats our birds are facing. Our schools, youth and family day programs have been hugely successful. Research in the UK shows that 80% of 8 to 12-year-olds are completely disconnected from nature. They spend their entire lives in front of screens, as I'm sure we all know. And much is being talked about regarding nature deficit disorder in children, referring to the trend that children are spending less time outdoors, resulting in a wide range of behavioral problems. So educating kids is so important. That's a big part of what we do, both at the banding station, with our open houses and family days, and with our in-classroom schools programs to, again, raise awareness and show kids what they can do to help birds and the environment. And it's not just children, of course, that need to connect with nature and be concerned about the environment. It's obviously adults too. And this was proven to be especially true during COVID, when people were in lockdown and craving the outdoors. So educating people about the natural world is a key component of successful conservation. And that is exactly what we're doing at VARC with all of our public outreach and education programs, with the focus on action-driven campaigns to encourage individuals to think of ways in which they can help birds and the environment. And we always say that no one who comes down to the banding station and holds and releases a rufous hummingbird like this one can fail to be captivated by these tiny dynamos with wings beating at 80 beats a second, those hearts beating at 1,200 beats a minute in flight, and breathing at over 500 times a minute during flight. And hummingbirds are apodiforms, which comes from the Greek meaning no feet. They do, of course, have feet, but their feet are too far back on their bodies to walk. So they can perch, but they can't walk. And this means if we place a hummingbird on someone's palm like this one, it will stay there until we give it the momentum to fly. And this is normally the reaction we get when someone releases one. So just a few more photos of some of the birds that we've banded in the past year or so at Colony Farm. A gorgeous male western tanager, male Anna's hummingbird, male rufous hummingbird, palm warbler, which of course is a rare bird for us here on the coast, black-headed grosbeak, lazuli buntings, which breed in the park, a golden crown kinglet, northern saw-whet owl. This is actually one of the species we're doing a special study on to track migratory movements. We attach a special avian nanotag on the bird's back, which emits a VHF radio signal every 30 seconds for up to 2 years. And once released with activated tags, our movements are recorded by the MOTUS network of receiving stations. So the MOTUS wildlife tracking system is an international collaborative network of researchers that use these automated radio telemetries to simultaneously track hundreds of individuals of numerous species, not just of birds, but of bats and insects too. So check out motus.org for more information. Long-distance migrant Swainson's thrush, the other species we are attaching MOTUS tags to identify stopover sites and wintering areas for them. Gorgeous eastern kingbird, Cooper's hawk, indigo bunting, gorgeous male common yellowthroat, northern shrike. Northern shrikes, of course, are predatory songbirds which use that hook bill to impale prey on thorn bushes and barbed wire fences. And early ornithologists actually called them butcher birds because they thought it was actually wanton killing. But research has shown that these birds actually cache prey like this for periods of food shortages. Chestnutback chickadee, western flycatcher, of course, formerly Pacific slope flycatcher. They've lumped them back into western now. Orange crown warbler, another orange crown warbler. And birds in this genus have these very, very fine bills, which they actually insert into unopened buds and then prise the bud open to extract small insects and spiders. And if you gently place a finger and thumb on their upper and lower mandibles like this, they'll actually prise your fingers apart in this reflex action. Gorgeous yellow warbler, baby cedar waxwing, rose-breasted grosbeak from last year, very rare bird for us here in Vancouver, and we caught 2 of them last year. Another uncommon bird for us on the coast, Vesper sparrow, marsh wren, yellow rump warbler, a gorgeous adult male ruby crown kinglet, and finally another uncommon to rare bird for us from just last fall, a common redpoll. Anyway, I could spend all day or all evening showing you photos of all the amazing birds that we've banded at Colony Farm, but lots more information on the VARC website about the issues facing our birds and what you can do to help. We have programs throughout the year with our bird monitoring and banding workshop coming up this month, and a VARC open house at the banding station this week, on Saturday this weekend. And just finally, we are a registered charity and volunteer organisation which relies on the generosity of donors to fund our work. So I would ask each of you to make a small donation via the website to support our work to raise awareness of the environmental threats facing our birds and other wildlife. And you can just click on the donate button on the homepage. But that's it. So thanks again so much for attending this evening.